Welcome to the Profit Builder. I'm excited to have you back again this week and to share with you our next video in the series on how to plug the profit leaks in your contracting business. And this week, we're going to be talking about sales and how do you have a strong sales process in order to ensure that you stack the odds in your favor of being able to close more jobs. And I'm interviewing this week Jeff with Sandler Sales. And Jeff is really an expert in this area, specifically working with contractors. So I'm looking forward to sharing that information with you. And I'm going to go ahead and jump in and start the video. I'm very delighted to have my guest, Jeff Borovitz, here with me today with Sandler Sales. And I'm going to have Jeff talk about himself and introduce himself here in just a second. And then we're going to jump in and we're going to talk about kind of the sales process and why do you want to have one. But specifically today, we're going to be focusing on sort of the intake part of the sales process. But before I jump in and ask Jeff my questions, Jeff, thank you so much for being here and being a guest on the Profit Builder. And would you just introduce yourself and tell people a little bit about your background?
Sure. First of all, Vicki, thanks a lot for inviting me on. I'm thrilled to be here. I own a Sandler training franchise, and I specialize in working with contractors, remodelers, both commercial and residential, and love the construction industry. My wife and I, between I've never built, let me be very clear, I've never built anything. If I can't probably even build a birdhouse effectively. But my wife and I, between the houses we've lived in, the rental properties we own, we have done 37 remodeling projects. Wow. So while I'm an expert at being a client. And so I can tell you, so I understand how the clients think. I understand what people love about contractors and what people really dread about contractors. And so I've taken the Sandler content, which is just fantastic sales content, and I've modified it and tweaked it to specialize it just for contractors to help them communicate more effectively, build trust more quickly, and understand and get to the reasons that people are going to buy from them more effectively, and do all that very quickly with the spin on it being, hey, how do I disqualify somebody as quickly as possible? Because, one of the things I'll say is that sales for contractors should be much more about cherry picking the very best clients for them to work with, rather than trying to get this mass income of leads and trying to go see and sign everybody we can. We should be instead being very, very selective and only cherry picking the very best clients to work with.
I completely, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have this chat with you is I love the approach that Sandler Sales has to how the whole process works from the very first phone call all the way through closing that sale. And I've known Jeff for a little while, and I knew his predecessor, Chip, for many years. And I've recommended Sandler Sales a lot to people over the years because their approach is one that understands not just like how to present what it is that you do or you offer well, but it really is based on understanding the psychology of how we work as human beings, how our brains work, what it is that can really help people make the best decision. And, the whole thing that you're talking about, Jeff, in terms of like having a screening process is not, some people might be listening to this. I was thinking like some people might be thinking, oh, like, if I'm trying to get business right now, why would I be picky about it? But the truth is, how many times have you as a contractor or any of us spent time and energy having a conversation with somebody who was not a right fit for us? And so part of having a good sales process is also understanding what you're talking about, which is how do you screen out somebody who's not really a right fit?
Vicki, it's super, super important that people understand that, yes, even when we need business, we need to be selective, because that, what I'll call, last summer, I was at Disneyland with my daughter, and I used to work at Disneyland in college, and we were in line at the Matterhorn, and there was somebody just really going after the poor young teenage girl that was there, just saying, oh, how many go to this number, how many go to that number. And she got on the phone because somebody wanted to talk to her boss, and she said, I have a very special guest that would like to talk to you. Well, very special guest is code for, wow, I can't believe how a big jerk this person is. That's Disney speak, right? And when we get that very special client, we don't even think about the fact that, yeah, we need business right now, and we get that very special client. But that person then, if they it makes it miserable for everybody in our company that they deal with, whether it's design, accounting, or, oh my gosh, production. Do you know how many production people leave because we sign bad clients that make their life really bad? And we have to be very selective, because it's part of our good employee retention, and it's part of making sure that we are setting ourselves up for success now and in the future.
Yeah. So what you just hit on is sort of the other piece of it, right? Which is having a good screening process, making sure we don't get the wrong client because they're not a right fit for us, but also that we're not wasting our time on somebody who's a tire kicker, right? Or somebody who's just really never going to buy from you. Just having, and the whole thing about having a sales process is that, and you and I were talking about this the other day, like when you have a sales process, you can drive how that process goes, as opposed to just reacting to what shows up. And when you're in the driver's seat, right, just like planning on a project, when you have a plan for what it is that you're going to do and where you're going to go and what the schedule is and what milestones are, and know what's going to happen before you're right there in the middle of it, the more control you have over the outcome of a project, right? And the same thing is true when we take this like microcosm called sales process. Mm-hmm. And so I want to jump in, because what we're going to focus on today is not the entire sales process. We're just going to focus on this first part, which is that intake part. And, Jeff, when we were talking, you said, what are the biggest mistakes that contractors do in that screening, in that first call when it comes in? So maybe you can just speak to that a little bit. What do you see are some of the biggest mistakes people make?
Well, I think that the single biggest mistake that people make is they talk about money on the phone on that lead intake call. They ask like, well, how much money do you want to spend on this project? And the reality is, there's no trust built yet. And so we haven't built trust. So people aren't going to necessarily freely talk about money and be honest about what they're going to spend. That's one problem. The other problem is most clients don't know what remodeling or building costs. I mean, they have no idea. I mean, you think about it. Where do people get their numbers? They only get numbers 4 places. They get numbers off of the internet, which do I even have to say that doesn't work? They also get numbers off of the HGTV. And I'm going to guess that most of us don't get our product and labor donated to us. We have to pay for that. So those HGTV numbers don't work. And then they get it from friends and family and neighbors. And that, it seems like that should be a good thing. But I remember after we remodeled our kitchen back in 2015, we did a full-blown remodel, moved walls and went down to studs and everything in our kitchen. And after we were done, we had our friends over, and the woman asked my wife, would you mind if I ask you how much you guys spent on the kitchen? And my wife, Molly, said, oh, we spent about $100,000. And after they left, I said to Molly, why did you lie to her? We spent about $185,000 on the kitchen. And Molly said, well, I don't want her to think we have that kind of money. And so, and these are good friends that we vacation with.
Oh my God.
I mean, we've gone to Yellowstone with these people.
I didn't see that coming. I got to tell you, I did not expect you to say that.
But it's just
I wouldn't even have
right?
thought about that. Yeah, that's crazy, isn't it?
So friends and family don't work not necessarily well. And the other place they get it is from your competitors. And unfortunately, not all your competitors price the same. Right. And so those are the 4 places people get priced. When we ask for money up front, you're almost begging to be lied to
Okay, so
or
one of the biggest mistakes is
misinformed.
to ask about money in that
Mhm.
initial phone call. What are the other mistakes that people make on that initial phone call?
Then eliminating people based on the answer about money. Disqualifying somebody on the lead intake because they ask about money. There's a contractor that I know that disqualified a friend of mine because when they called about a hall bathroom, they told him that they were going to they had a budget of $30,000. And the contractor said, "Oh, well, we don't do anything for less. We don't do any kind of bathroom like that for less than 60,000." And he said, he disqualified the person. Well, this same guy called me to get somebody else to talk to. That person didn't talk about money on the call, ended up signing him to a contract for just over $80,000. And by the time everything was said and done, they were almost to 90,000 by the time the bathroom was finished. And so when we disqualify based on that budget answer, that becomes a problem.
Okay, so how should people be qualifying for people on that initial phone call? What should that look like, that initial call? So we know that it shouldn't be asking about price right away because there's not enough like and trust that's been developed and established. And as I'm listening to you, it could be that you're disqualifying people because they don't really know. They throw a number out there and they really have no concept at all. So, they're just like, I don't know. And then that doesn't really, they're not making an informed decision. So what should that phone call look like, that initial incoming phone call?
Well, before we do that, we have to make sure we understand who we want as clients. And so the first thing that contractors and builders and remodelers need to do is understand who their client is. And everybody has a little bit different spin on who their client is. I think I was telling you in the other day in our conversation, I've got a contractor lives locally here in the Bay Area where I am. And he says to me, "Oh, Jeff, if they drive a Tesla, they're my client." Because people who drive Teslas, in his opinion, have disposable income and are willing to pay for luxury items. And so one of the questions he asks on his lead intake is, "What kind of car do you drive?" And if they say a Tesla, he's like, "Yeah, boy." But developing that, and I got a client down in the southern part of the U.S. who looks for people who have pianos in their houses. And so these are just a few things, but what you want to do is we have an acronym that we call CAPS. What are the characteristics of your best client is the C in CAPS. And that's things like where they live, dual income, professions, what kind of car they drive, do they have a piano? These are some characteristics. The next thing is what kind of actions do they take? And by that, I mean, we're looking for people who value their time more than their money. If they're going to not do it, if they're not going to be a do-it-yourselfer, we want people to value their time or their money. So do they hire people like cleaning services and landscapers, things that they could do themselves, but they'd rather pay somebody else to do? Those make really great clients. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, but let me ask you a question. So we're talking about an intake kind of conversation you're having with somebody, right? So your intake form, I understand, has certain characteristics, or what's the criteria that you're sorting for? Is it a right fit or is it not a right fit? And so that criteria has certain characteristics to what that person, in the example of your guys there, a piano or a Tesla, but there are certainly other characteristics that make for a client that you're ideally looking for. I guess the question I have is about actions. How do you know what actions somebody takes if you're in an initial phone call with somebody?
We tell, when in our lead intake training, we tell people to ask, "Hey, do you have a cleaning service? Do you clean the house yourself? How does your land, do you have a gardener or do you like doing the gardening yourself?"
So you're kind of listening for, are they DIY people or are they people who hire people? Okay, good.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
What's the next one?
And so then the P is, what kind of problems do they have that you can solve? When you look at your clients, we know that there's basically 6 problems that homeowners have that builders can solve. and contractors and remodelers. They can solve when they're embarrassed about their current home or where they live. Some people want more privacy in their home and they want to remodel. Other people feel that there's too much privacy and they feel isolated. And so these are the people that want to knock down walls in their houses. Other people feel that the house is great. We love the location and everything, but it's just too small. We need to expand and make it bigger. And they want to add on square footage, right? And then there's people that, oh my gosh, they moved in years ago, and when they moved in, the husband said to the wife, "Oh, don't worry, we can redo the kitchen. That you don't have to live with the avocado green tile. Don't worry, we can redo the kitchen." And now it's 15 years later, and they still have avocado green kitchen, and the wife just is at the end of her rope, and she feels like there was a broken promise made. And then finally, the last one is the easy one. It's safety and security. When something becomes unsafe, or they feel a lack of security in how things are at the house, those are really the 6 problems that homeowners have that contractors and remodelers can solve.
All right. So I do have a question, because I understand, I know I say this to people all the time, like nobody remodels their house. Quite frankly, nobody hires a consultant or a coach unless you have a problem. There is always a problem behind why somebody remodels their house. And so I always break down problems into a few categories. I love the categories you have here, but I always think about it in terms of there is a persistent problem or breakdown that is reoccurring that you're looking for a solution to. There is a highly desired state that is unfulfilled. And so I think about like me, and kitchen is a big thing. I'm a big cook. I love to cook. And so having a cooking space is super important. So I'm just thinking, like, if you're somebody who has a house and you go, I just like, what category does that fit in? Like, I love to cook and this kitchen just does not work for me.
Yeah, that's probably gonna be either embarrassed or cramped. And I think of these 6 things. I think, at Sandler, we talk a lot, Vicki, as you know, about pain. And I think of these 6 things as big pain buckets.
Yeah.
There may be multiple pains that they're embarrassed about, right? So there may be multiple things that go in that embarrassed pain bucket. Then there may be 1 or 2 things to go in the cramp pain bucket. And it's not necessary that you have things in all 6 buckets, but you need to have at least 3, preferably 5 pains that go into these different buckets in total.
So when your intake form, when you're asking them questions, some of the questions that you're asking is to help you find their characteristic. What actions are they taking? Are they DIY or do they hire outside people? And the third, the P is problems. What are the problems you can solve? And identifying embarrassed, privacy, too much privacy. They feel too isolated, feel small and need to make it bigger. It's outdated and I don't like it. And safety and security.
Yeah.
All right, cool. What's the
and so I'm not looking for the lead intake person to get 3 to 5. That's the salesperson's job. The lead intake person needs to get one of these. If they meet all of your, if they have the right characteristics, they're not a DIYer, and they have one of these things, they're probably worth going for you to go out and have an introductory meeting with.
Okay.
Right? Because remember, I said it's not about having a high closing percentage. It's about cherry picking the best clients.
Okay. And it's CAPS, is that right? What's the S?
CAPS. The S is symptoms. What are the symptoms of some of these problems? Listen, it would be great and wonderful if clients would say, well, I'm really embarrassed by it, because they don't say that.
No.
What they say is, well, we don't really entertain, right? That's usually a symptom of embarrassed. They're embarrassed by the house, so they don't have people over. And they really would like to entertain. And now they're not getting invited other places because they never invite people back. They never reciprocate, right? And so understanding what the symptoms behind those pains are, so that when you're talking to people, you can pick out which pain it really is. And then you can say, sounds like it might be, is it possible? I just had somebody, Vicki, that told me that they were kind of embarrassed to have people over. Have you ever felt that way? And now all of a sudden you're telling a nice third-party story, right? And it's not you saying that their kitchen's embarrassing. You're just telling them about somebody else, and they agree, and they immediately go and agree with it. And now you've got some real, what Sandler would call, pain.
Yeah. And so here's what I appreciate about listening to you right now, Jeff, is, part of the, it kind of goes back to that thing of why do somebody call you to have a project done, is that they have something that's not working, and and we don't want to talk about the thing that is uncomfortable, or we tend to talk about, well, I want it updated, I want it to be fresh, I want it to be pretty, but remembering that whole thing of that there is a pain that's behind it, and that our job as contractors is to sort of be like sleuths a little bit to figure out what that is and be able to articulate it. Because when you can speak to it, and when you can speak to what the pain is and have them be really clear about it, right? And then before you start talking about how they would like it, is a way to start to have people feel that's where you start to build that know, like, and trust, right? So, and that's where you start to build that relationship of people feeling like they are heard, they're seen, that you understand their problem. And what's interesting too, and I think you and I may have been talking about this last week, is what I see oftentimes happens is when people get to the pain point, they instantly want to go fix it. They want to talk about like how they're going to get rid of the problem, which is not the second step, right? Second step is find out what they want next so that you can create a gap so that you can make that offer.
100%.
So I didn't mean to jump ahead on you, but that's I love that. So you're saying having those characteristics, what are the actions that they take, understanding, are they DIY, are they, do they hire outside support, helping them get clear on what the problem is that you're solving, and understanding how to interpret symptoms that really lead to what that problem is. So you're saying have that all kind of in your intake form.
Well, you need to have a clearly defined written set of caps before you even take a phone call. I will say this, the person that's doing the contractor's lead intake is the most important person in their company, because they are either setting sales up for success or failure based on how well they do this lead intake. And you have to set, as an owner, you have to set your lead intake person up for success by giving them a thoroughly fleshed out set of caps, right? Of those characteristics, actions, problems, and symptoms, so that they know what to ask. Because, imagine this is like a big GPS, right? And, if you don't put a destination in the GPS, you're just a person out driving around and it shows an empty map.
Yeah.
Right. And we need to give them the destination, this is what our client looks like.
Yeah. So I'm realizing as I'm listening to you that I think that we may need to make a distinction here, which is, you and I talk about like sales process, and the first part of it is that initial phone call, and that you're talking about a lead intake piece of it, which is that initial call where you're going through that list of cap questions that you've identified before that are in writing, right, on a sheet of paper. Define, just if you will, for people, like, what do you consider to be lead intake? Like, let's give it a definition, like what's the overall purpose of the lead intake? And then if you would speak to what is the thing that should happen at the end of every lead intake call.
Yeah, great. Yeah. So lead intake is the very first conversation somebody in your company has with a potential client. This is to do an initial qualification on the client. Do they meet our caps? If they meet our caps, they have a pain that we can solve, and they haven't disqualified themselves by the answer to some of the other questions on the lead intake form, then the lead intake person should set a meeting up, a first meeting up with somebody in the sales chain, whoever the account developer is, or project developer, or whatever the title in your company is. That's that first meeting, which is different than the lead intake. And how the lead intake call should end is with what Sandler calls an upfront contract of exactly what's going to happen at that first meeting. where the lead intake person is going to say, well, Vicky's going to call you, or Vicky. So you and Vicky will be coming out to your house on Tuesday at 2 o'clock. When Vicky gets there, she's going to just kind of review a little bit about what we covered today, make sure nothing's changed. She's going to give you a chance to ask about anything that you want to talk about and let her know those things on Tuesday. She's going to go over a few things that she wants to make sure that you cover. And then Vicky will talk about, we'll review with you the fact that you guys are going to be together for about 90 minutes. And then Vicky will let you know that at the end of that meeting, what decision will be made, either to move ahead or to shake hands and part ways. And it's what Sandler calls an upfront contract. And then the lead intake person is going to write down what they said and give that to Vicky, so that when Vicky comes out, Vicky's going to do exactly what the lead intake person said she would do, keep that promise, and right away, from the very first in-person interaction, your company looks way more professional than your competitors, because now they're hearing the exact same thing, and they know that you actually talk to one another and you can communicate effectively, which is a big part that people want to know about contractors.
Yeah, and that you have a process.
Yes.
And you have a system for actually doing what you say you're going to do. Yeah.
Yeah.
Love that.
Yeah. Yep. So that's how every one of these calls should end. And sometimes, and that's if the person qualifies on the lead intake. If they don't qualify, we have to also tell them that in a nice way. We're not going to say, well, you don't qualify, but we're going to tell them, hey, unfortunately, the type of project you're talking about isn't really in our sweet spot. Right? This is the disqualification now. This is not really in our sweet spot. However, I'd be happy to give you a referral to somebody who would be a great fit for your project. Listen, if the person's not a good fit for you, and you know somebody who they would be a good fit for, help them out. Give them somebody to call. Because if you just say, well, we don't do that kind of work, or that project's too small for us, which I've heard a lot of contractors say, well, that's how you get the negative Google review. That you were too good, they were too good for me, right? And you don't need that in your life. If you're not going to do the work, give it to somebody else who can do it. There's people that do smaller jobs than you do. Give it to them.
Yeah. Love that. Jeff, I know you have a checklist or a process that you're going to share with people. Can you speak to that? I think that it would be really helpful for people to have some guidelines for creating this intake form.
Yeah. So what you want to do is you want to make sure you have those. You want to there's a few things on lead intake form. You need to know how they found, and this is a huge mistake the contractors make. What made them call you today? Right? How did they hear about you? Because you're spending tons and tons of money on marketing. And wouldn't it be nice to know which parts of your marketing are working? There's an old saying that somebody once said, Vicky, you probably know who said it. I don't. Somebody said, I know that about 50% of my marketing budget is wasted. I just don't know which 50%. And so we need to be, one of the things on the lead intake, we need to track where the call came from. How'd they hear about us? Because it would be really nice to know which part of our marketing budget's working. There's all the normal questions about where do you live, the address, how long have you lived in the home, how old's the home, right? How long you've been thinking about this project. Those are things everybody asks. But the one thing that not enough people ask early on, and this should be asked on that call, and it should be right on that sheet somewhere, which is, hey, have you ruled out moving as an option? Because people are not going to spend hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars with you if they still think they could solve the problem by moving. And wouldn't it be nice to know that up front? Yeah.
So you have a template.
I do.
To share with people.
Yep, I'm happy to share it.
So be in the show notes, and in the people can get it there by clicking on that link. And if people want to get a hold of you, Jeff, and learn more about Sandler Sales training, how do they do that?
Best way to get a hold of me is on text. I'm great at text. And my text number is area code 408-314-7395. That's 314-7395.
Jeff, thank you. Thanks for your time. I really appreciate it. I think that you've shared some great stuff here today for people in terms of understanding how to be more effective at that initial intake phone call, and really appreciate your generosity in sharing that intake lead sheet. I think that will really help people kind of jumpstart in implementing what you've been sharing with them today. So thanks
Yeah,
for
happy to do it. Thanks for inviting me in. I really appreciate it.
All right. I hope you enjoyed today's video and my interview with Jeff. If you're interested in more information about a sales process, I am going to share with you a link down below that is my sales process toolkit that actually talks about how do you sort of set up that whole structure for creating a sales process within your business that will help guide you all along the way from the time that phone rings all the way to closing the job, so that you have a solid process in place. And in it included are some guidelines for even the in-person meeting, as well as presenting the bid and so on and so forth. So hopefully between those two tools, the one I'm giving you of the sales process toolkit, as well as what Jeff is sharing in terms of that intake and how to have those questions be set up ahead of time in order to help you create a really great intake process in your sales, with the idea that all of that helps you increase your sales and increase your close rate and become more effective in that part of your business. I hope you found today's video and my interview with Jeff to be helpful, and maybe picked up some ideas and pointers for how do you create a stronger sales process in your contracting business that will help you close more sales. And make sure to go ahead and download that free resource. In next week's video, I'll be sharing with you the next step in this video series on how to plug the profit leaks in your contracting business. And we're going to be talking about production and how do you create some systems and tools for yourself on the production side of your business that can help things run more smoothly, help you increase the efficiency of your team, and help you increase client communication. So make sure to check out that video.